If you're going to hire someone who kind of breaks the mold, whether it's a female, minority, person of color, try to look at it from, I am hiring this person for the potential that they bring to this role. Let me not look at their resume and say, what boxes have you checked? What experience do you bring to the table? Look at them and say, ooh, what could we do with this person?
Welcome to Breaking Money Silence, a podcast series aimed at helping all of us talk more openly about money. Your host, Kathleen Kingsbury, is a wealth psychology expert who is doing what she does best, speaking about taboo topics. International speaker, author, and founder of KBK Wealth Connection, Kathleen understands money and our relationship with it. Now, here is Kathleen.
Hi, this is Kathleen Kingsbury, the host of the Breaking Money Silence podcast. This year in 2024, we're doing a special series all year long on unleashing your true value, specifically designed to help women advisors and related financial professionals identify and communicate their value so they can earn more, be more profitable, and have greater financial well-being. We're going to have guests from the financial services industry, coaches, consultants, people who can give you a different perspective and offer different tactics for unleashing your true value so you can feel better about making sales, feel better about earning more, and ultimately we can close the gender wage gap in the wealth management industry. So I thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy this week's episode. Today, I am joined by Anita Knotts. She is the founder of Lotus Women's Institute. She's somebody that I recently got to know, and I thought I have to bring her and her work to the Breaking Money Silence listeners. Today, we are going to be talking about one of her specialties, cultivating your executive presence. And so let me tell you a little bit about her before I bring her on the podcast. Anita is a highly accomplished senior executive with over 30 years of experience in financial services. As a woman of color, she has played a pivotal role in shaping the industry and advocating for diversity and inclusion. Anita is a respected advisor, keynote speaker, and mentor, and she's dedicated her expertise to empowering women and traditionally underrepresented groups in finance. No surprise that we get along there, right? She's also the founder and CEO of Lotus Women's Institute. Anita is passionate, and she's very passionate about bringing more women and people of color into the wealth management industry. There's a lot more I could say about her, but let's bring her onto the podcast and she can fill you in herself. Welcome, Anita. It's nice to have you here today.
Oh, Kathleen, thank you so much. Anytime I'm invited to speak about this type of work and these topics, I can't say yes fast enough.
Well, I am glad it worked out. I think our listeners will really benefit. But before we even get into the topic at hand, one of the things is I truly love the mission that your firm has to bring more women and people of color into the wealth management industry. There are not a lot of us, but a few of us that have been dedicated to that for a long time. I know for you recently transitioned from corporate, a couple of years, transitioned from corporate into owning your own firm and institute. Tell us a little bit about how you decided to open the institute and have this focus.
Absolutely. It's a great place to start, Kathleen. I think a lot of women can relate to a lot of what I'm about to say. Now I'm in my third year of entrepreneurship. So I always say Lotus Women's Institute is a startup, but Anita Knotts is not a startup because I've been around the block a few times with my 30 plus years. But prior to launching Lotus in early 2021, I have to actually say the seeds of this were planted even probably a good 5 years before I actually did anything. And I would say, I started kind of realizing that probably in my mid to late 40s that I was probably not in my final career resting place, so to speak, that I wasn't actually in my final career home with the firm that I was at that time, which I had a pretty good run with. I didn't know, though, what that meant or what would that look like if I did leave. But, and this is a phrase I use often when I'm speaking to women especially, listen to what the universe is telling you at any given point in time, especially in your career. I noticed that I was, launching women in wealth initiatives, getting women to understand more about financial literacy. I launched an internal women's leadership program for women at the firm. And I was also focused because I had a leadership role at the time where I had the forum and the platform to make hiring decisions. I noticed that I was, kind of gravitating towards finding more women, finding more minorities, underrepresented demographics. So I had to listen to those things. Like, why was I focused on these? Why was I motivated by these things? And so then what happened? 2020 happened. And again, like so many women in 2020, I think I was going through kind of a renaissance in my own mind. Like, what does this actually mean? What is this about? What is life about? What is my work about? How do I find more purpose and meaning in what I'm doing? So, probably took the biggest professional risk of my career at that time. I figured, hey, we're coming out of a pandemic. I was going through some personal challenges, putting my firstborn through college. And I figured that was just about the best time to step away from financial stability with a paycheck and go launch my own business. And the challenge was, again, I still didn't know in what way, shape, or form that would come into. And you leave it to your women's like personal advisory board. I always say every woman should have a personal advisory board. And I was sitting in one of my friend's living rooms, and she asked me, this was a week before I left corporate America, my last day. And she said, so what are you going to do? And it sounds like a pretty basic question, Kathleen, but I cannot tell you to this day how liberating that was, hearing that question, because it made me realize, oh, I get to do what I want to do. I don't
Well,
have to work.
especially after being in corporate for so long, where
Yeah,
you do get to make some choices, but it isn't like being an entrepreneur and being like, I get to create this company.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And to have somebody ask me that, it brought it home for me. And my answer to her was, and I exact sentence was, I want to bring more Anitas into this space, into wealth management. So more women, more people of color, all of that. And she said, okay, fine, go do it. Let's get a legal pad. Let's draw this out, right? And it helped that she was an entrepreneur as well. So that's where it all started. So the risk was stepping away from the financial stability, the career stability, without knowing exactly where that would take me. So that's how Lotus was born.
Nice. 3 years later, do you think it's worth the risk?
Every day I thank the lucky stars, right? I feel so blessed. And I always say, I don't want to make it sound like rainbows and lollipops because, as you know, this is the hardest work. I mean, being an entrepreneur, it's hard work. It's a lot of
Yeah.
work. I think it's romanticized a lot. There's so many amazing things about it, but make no mistake, I am working harder at the age of 54 than I ever did at 34. That's without a doubt.
Yeah, it is interesting that it is romanticized, but I have a big smile on my face because I find that a lot of women who do make the jump where it makes sense for them to make the jump do end up feeling really good about what they're doing. And I always love the beginning of a business. I mean, I've been in business for a while now, so I had to kind of recreate a beginning after 2020, but I love that energy. Now, I imagine being a woman of color in a predominantly male wealth management industry. Can't wait to not say that sentence, predominantly male wealth management industry, but still we're there. How do you think your personal experiences from work really impacted the direction of your firm?
So first, I will say, because I think it's important to make this statement that, listen, I was 22 years old when I entered the workforce. And up until I entered college, my first 18 years of life, I had never fit in. I was always the odd person out, whether it was because I couldn't speak English in my kindergarten classroom or because I was brown skinned in a very white suburb, whatever the reason may be, right? And this is not unique to me. There's so many people in this country that go through this. But what transformational experiences I had in college, I think, really informed the rest of my life, to be honest with you, because I found a group of people and friends in college who not only encouraged me to embrace my differentness, if that's a word, or my uniqueness, but really to encourage me to take delight in it, be proud of it. And so when I jumped into the workforce at the age of 22, I wasn't really coming at it from a, oh gosh, I don't look like anybody in this room. What do I do? I was coming at it from, oh my gosh, I get to be the only person who looks like me. I was actually like proud of it. So that was definitely, I think that's an important thing to note, because as I'm working with young women who do come from marginalized demographics and entering this field, I encourage them to do the same thing. Don't try to be like the person to the right and left of you. You are you for a reason on a planet of 8 billion people. Try to be you and see what you can leverage from that, right? But that said, I will say that now, looking back on my career, one of the biggest things that I saw is that I had no choice but to outwork everybody in the room, right? It's amazing to me how now, as I go through year after year of reflection, the amount of mediocre, and I'll just say it, mediocre male leadership I saw that was actually just kind of accepted. It was just the norm, not a big deal, right? But I didn't necessarily get those types of breaks. And I don't come at it from a, oh, woe is me, not at all. Because you know what? It encouraged me to work that much harder, but it also encouraged me then to kind of navigate my career in a much more successful manner. Do I think it's fair? No, not really. But that you ask, how does this inform my work now? This is what I talk to firms about nowadays. If you're going to hire someone who kind of breaks the mold, whether it's a female, minority, person of color, try to look at it from, I am hiring this person for the potential that they bring to this role. Let me not look at their resume and say, what boxes have you checked? What experience do you bring to the table? Look at them and say, ooh, what could we do with this person? What type of value could they bring to this organization? So I think all of this is kind of connected.
Well, and what is interesting too is you're talking about a mindset shift. And what you're specifically talking about is when there is a difference, granted, it's not fair, but how do I use that to my advantage? Whether that's gender, race, it could be a variety of other things.
Yeah.
And the other message I like is being authentically you. I mean, no matter what you look like, how you identify, each of us, when we're selling or when we're growing professionally, once we lean into who we are, we tend to be our best.
I couldn't agree more. And I get into a lot of, respectful dialogue, I will say, about other people who may find themselves as in the minority bucket. And they get very angry, they get very frustrated. It's not fair. And while I agree with all of those things, we can't stop at the anger and frustration. We have to go to the next step, which is now what? What do I do with this? So I don't think there's anything wrong with anger and frustration. I just encourage people to channel that to make some change in our world. So that's where I sit.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So we're going to take a quick break. We are with Anita Knotts. She is the founder of the Lotus Women's Institute. And we're going to come back. And after the break, we're going to talk a little bit about executive presence and finding your value. We'll be right back.
Feeling exhausted from the constant struggle to communicate your true value? Are you battling the fear and uncertainty that often accompany building a service-based business? If so, the Unleash Your True Value private coaching program could be the solution you've been searching for. Designed by Kathleen Burns Kingsbury, wealth psychology expert and money mindset coach for the ambitious woman poised to elevate her business to new heights. Find out if the program is right for you. Simply email kbk@kbkwealthconnection.com now to set up a free consultation.
I am here today with Anita Knotts. She is the founder of Lotus Women's Institute, and we have been talking a little bit about how she found the Institute, what her personal experiences were, and how they informs her work. And now we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about identifying and communicating your value, which we all know is the name of this series, is really how do you unleash your value. I'm just curious, before we talk a little bit about executive presidents, Anita, do you think gender and race makes a difference in our ability to advocate for ourselves? I know this can be kind of a loaded topic, but I'm just curious your perspective. If so, how? And if not, why not?
Yeah, what a fantastic question. I mean, listen, of course, right? If you're asking a woman of color, I'm as a woman of color, I would respond with a resounding yes. Yes, I do think so. Let me give you a concrete example. When I was in my early 30s and I was actually a senior wealth advisor, and I would walk into a room with, let's just say, a white male advisor next to me. We were kind of approaching it as a partnership, sitting down with a client. He already had earned his right to sit at that table, right? There was really no one that was going to question why he was there. But from where I sat, and this is probably a good transition into the next topic in terms of executive presence. When I walked into the room, it wasn't that anybody was saying, oh, she shouldn't be here. It wasn't that at all. But it was more so, well, she looks young. She's doesn't have a black suit on like he does. She speaks a little bit differently. She doesn't necessarily come across as sort of rigid. So does that mean she's not serious? Does she know what we're about? Does she know anything about asset allocation? Does she know about the capital markets? So it was almost like I was walking into a situation where I kind of had to earn my way to that table. And I had to earn it by actually talking the talk. So, yeah, absolutely. The fact that I was female and the fact that I was brown skinned, I absolutely think it makes a difference in the way that I'm perceived. Was it hostile? Absolutely not. In fact, I'm somewhat grateful for that, Kathleen, if I were to be really honest, because again, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, it made me kind of work harder by peeling the layers of the onion back on who Anita was. I got to tell the clients about my lived experience in the industry thus far. And you know what that did? It got them to trust me. It got them to open up. And over the course of my career, I ended up building amazing client relationships and being really successful as an advisor. But I guess the point I would make here is that to get to that, I do feel that I had to put in a little extra something, something, if that makes sense.
I love that. Something, something. So, your determination and you wanting to put in a little something, something is really very, very admirable. And I know it's an area that you enjoy coaching women on, and we haven't labeled it per se. So let's talk about executive presence, about making sure you're showing up in a certain way. But for those who are listening in that don't really understand what executive presence is, do you have a definition, and can you tell us a little bit about why it's so important?
Yeah, it's a great question. And when I'm asked what my definition of it is, I always give a visual. I always say when you're in a meeting or even if you're in a social setting and somebody you don't know walks into that room, male or female, and somehow you don't know their name, you don't know their status, nothing like that, but you just know that it's somebody that you need to know. It's a person who's got some influence in that room and they haven't said anything. That is executive presence. It is not your job title. It is not your status. It is not whether you have this, command and control type of leadership style. It's none of those things. It's simply how do you carry yourself? Do you inspire trust? Are you approachable? Do you have the ability to influence those around you? And from my perspective, one of the lessons that I learned in executive presence through personal experiences, going through some pretty trying times in the industry, did I have the ability to stay calm in a room when chaos was ensuing, right? So it's examples like that that I think of when defining executive presence. And quite frankly, let me just also add, you don't have to be in a leadership position to have executive presence. I've seen so many individuals, even early on in their career, exhibit the type of qualities that gave them that strong presence in any room they walked into.
It's interesting. I love your definition, but what's interesting to me is two things. One is because I am tall, people who are listening to the podcast wouldn't know that, but I'm 5'9". And when I walk into a room, a lot of times people will talk about not executive presence, but my presence, or there's something about you on stage. I didn't always have that. I've been tall for a long time, but I didn't always have that. So it's kind of a silly question, but I'm curious, does height make a difference in terms of people's executive presence? Are people who are taller perceived differently? Because it just seems like I get that comment a lot.
I definitely think so because, part of I think we're going to get into this in a second, but I call it the ASL method. The L stands for how you look, right? And that's the first thing that people see is the physicality of who you are. So absolutely, first impressions, I don't care what anybody says, first impressions count. First impressions matter. I was just at a parade with my mom yesterday, and this woman came by, and that was the first thing that my mom noticed is that, good God, she must be 6 feet tall. And it didn't matter that she had this like beautiful flowy dress and she was like singing on stage and she had this amazing voice. All my mom could see initially was the height. So I think especially because as women, oftentimes we're not tall. For me, I'm 5'1". I've been short most of my life, right? So so it is what it is. But I do think that when there's a physicality aspect about you that is not of the norm, I do think that it draws attention to your presence.
That is interesting. The other thing I'm going to say, the second point is that, like I've been this tall for a long time. And earlier on in my career, I didn't have good self esteem. I didn't feel very good in my body. I really was not confident. And I would come across to other people, I've been told, as uptight, unapproachable. And then when I did my own work and then certainly developed, my skills as a speaker and a presenter and in the business world over time, I now get such different feedback. Like, you're open. I just feel like I can trust you. My height has stayed the same, but a lot of these other things have changed. So obviously, even though I didn't go through your method, there is something that happens when women work on it. And I did work on it, that helps you develop this executive presence. So tell us a little bit about the method that you use, Anita, and how that helps the women that you coach.
Absolutely. So I refer to it as the ASL method: how you act, how you speak, and how you look. And, I'm actually going to do it reverse just because of the example you just gave. The look part is quite frankly the least important of the three, of the how you act, how you speak, and how you look. But if you think about it this way, before people see how you act, your personality, so to speak, or how you speak, what comes out of your mouth, the first thing they see is your look, your physical composition, right? So that's why it's important. And it's interesting nowadays, if I coach a lot of younger women in the industry, I do get a few eye rolls. I also have a 22-year-old daughter who gives me the eye roll. It's like, Mom, really? That's so like old school. No one should care about what I'm wearing if I'm doing a really good job.
But they do.
But they do.
It's not fair, but they do.
That's exactly right. And this is how I explain it, Kathleen. That is a fair statement for them to make, okay? But here's the thing. We are still not the majority in power. We're not. And I joke with my daughter, when we are all dead and you guys have taken over the world, run it the way you want. But right now, if you look at the power structure and who has money and influence in our society, and I'm not going to name specific demographics, but I think we know who they are. They do give a hoot about what you look like, right? So if you want to make progress, if you want to start chipping away and making change and creating influence yourself, you kind of have to reach across and see that you are making a connection with these people who don't necessarily look like you. So for now, it does mean that how you look matters. Now, I'm going to state the obvious. It's also industry specific. When
Yes.
we're in an
Yep.
industry, right, when we're in a career where we're managing money, financial livelihood for individuals, whether ultra high net worth or the everyday person, you can't come in looking a certain way. You have to look probably leaning a little bit more on the conservative side. Now, that's loosened over time, the standards, but certainly you have to walk in representing the fact that you're inspiring confidence in that person, that you can take care of them and their financial future. That's just a fact.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've worked in a variety of different industries. And I can tell you, like, how I would show up to a financial services conference. It's not dramatically different because I am who I am and my wardrobe is my wardrobe. But it is a very different than if I show up to psychological conference, where the dress code tends to be a little bit looser. So I do think look is important. I think what's great is it isn't the most important. So tell us about act and speak. Tell us a little bit about those pieces to the puzzle.
Absolutely. So the act and speak. So when I look at how you act, I always, here comes another envisioning example. I always say, before you walk into a room, I want you to have an out of body experience. Make like you're already in the room and you're watching yourself walk into the room. What do you want that person inside the room to see when they see you walking in? And I want you to hold yourself that way, right? So, using my own example, I tend to lean over a lot when I walk. I don't walk standing up straight. So, before I walk into a meeting, and it could be a boardroom filled with 50 people, a stage with hundreds of people in the audience, or it could be a meeting, a small conference room with 2 people in it. I always make sure that I'm walking up and I'm standing straight. It has to be a cognizant thing. So the physicality of it again, how am I walking in? The next is really stuff that I know it sounds pretty basic, but looking at people when you're talking to them, not that loosey-goosey handshake, but a firm handshake. And then when you're speaking, really speaking without jargon, really speaking with clarity and confidence. And by the way, when I say confidence, speaking confidently, I don't mean that you have to know the answer to every question.
Great distinction.
Right? It's a huge
Yes.
distinction. I think so many women especially we trip ourselves up about that. Who in the world knows everything about everything? Why are we holding ourselves to that standard? What is wrong with saying, wow, that is a phenomenal question. I've not heard that before, but now you got me curious. Let me go find out. And you better believe I'm going to come back to you with that because now you got me going, right?
Well, and
Yeah,
the way you just said that, Anita,
yeah,
actually fosters more trust than the reverse way of doing it. Because
that's
when you act like you know everything, you become
yes.
less approachable. It can come across, and I think this can be men or women, as very arrogant, as opposed to really saying, hey, we're in this together. Let's figure it out.
Right, right. That's huge. I think the topic of confidence is a difficult one for many of us. And speaking confidently is, and you just said it minutes ago, so much of this is developed and learned over time. It's a practice, so to speak. But the first step is to always acknowledge, right? Acknowledge that there's something to work on. So those are the topics that I kind of connect the dots on all 3 of those things: how you act, how you speak, and how you look. And at the end of the day, if I had to summarize it in one word, it's authenticity. It's really being who you are comfortable with because people can sniff out a fake from a mile away.
So the question I would ask as we're starting to wind down is, and this is a big one, you can be like, I can't answer that in 1 or 2 sentences. But in terms of authenticity, is there any way to get there more quickly? And I'm saying that laughing, given the fact that I've worked a long time to be comfortable in my shoes. I think other women have as well. Is the ASL method kind of a quick route, or, help me out? Is there a way to do this quicker?
I think the quickest way is to do the following, and I'm only saying it because this is what I did. I think you come up with 3 things that identify what your core values are. Just 3. I don't think it has to be anything super complicated. And whenever you come across a quick decision that you need to make one way or another, do I talk to this person? Do I answer this question? Do I take this action? Ask yourself, is it aligned with these values? I do it multiple times a day, Kathleen. It is single-handedly because that forces me, that moves the compass for me to always focus on being authentically Anita. Does it align with who I am internally? And if it doesn't, you know what? You end up kind of annoying a lot of people sometimes when you say no, but it's okay. If you can look at yourself in the mirror before you go to bed every night and know that you were you, then you're being authentic.
Love that. So that may be your one tip, but usually I ask my guests to leave us with one tip for our listeners. And I know this is a big topic and we've talked about a lot. You've given a lot of value to the audience, but what's one thought you'd like to leave them with?
This is an easy one for me. I'm not going to lie. It's do the thing that you are fearful of doing, because it's all of the things that we talk about nowadays, right? It's like we all have fear. No one lives without fear, even the most powerful and successful people. But they're powerful and successful because they did the thing anyway. So living in our confines of comfort, not stepping out of our comfort zone, it stagnates our development as human beings, right? And this could apply to your career, but also personally, I would say. So always sitting with what it is that you're fearful of, but then doing it anyway. Because one of two things is going to happen. You're going to be successful with it, or I would say more importantly, you're not going to be successful with it. You're going to fail at it. And then what happens? You're going to dust yourself off, you're going to move on, and you're going to turn around and say, I'm still standing. I'm just going to keep doing it. And that is how, tying back it with confidence from a few minutes ago, this is how you develop confidence over time. I always say, I'm not a confident person because everybody tells me how great I am. I'm a confident person because I've messed up so many times and I still got up and moved on, moved forward. And that's what it takes to build ourselves over time. So that would be my biggest tip.
Yes, and that's a really, really important one, not just for women, but for everyone, because we learn so much from our mistakes.
Yes.
And maybe that's why some of this comes as you develop over your career, because you need some time to mess up and learn from it.
Right.
It has been such a joy to break money silence with you and talk a little bit about our shared passion of empowering women. So tell me a little bit, and also the people listening in, where's the best way to find out more about your work?
Well, certainly you can go to my website, www.lotuswomensinstitute.com. I would love it and be so grateful if you would sign up for my newsletter, which I write about a lot of the things that you and I talked about this morning, Kathleen. Certainly connect with me on LinkedIn and Instagram. And I'm still a bit of a dinosaur, and I've got a Facebook business page as well. So I'd love to connect with your listeners in any of those ways.
I didn't know I was a dinosaur because we have a Facebook Breaking Money Silence. See, I learned so much on this podcast. I do. I learn a lot. Well, from one dinosaur to the other, and I mean that in a kind, loving way. It has been so fun to get to know you and get to know your work, Anita. And people should definitely check out the website and sign up for the newsletter. I know I get it and I enjoy it each time it comes into my inbox.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. It's been wonderful and I've enjoyed the chat. It's gone really fast.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Breaking Money Silence, hosted by Kathleen Burns Kingsbury, a wealth psychology expert, author, and founder of KBK Wealth Connection. If you like what you heard today, be sure to subscribe on iTunes or your favorite podcast app and leave a review. Also, share this episode with your friends and family. It is a great way to get the conversation started. For more money talk tips and information, or to hire Kathleen to speak at your next event, go to www.breakingmoneysilence.com.